Hello my dear sewing friends. So today we have another highly requested tutorial when it comes to sewing with knits, and that is how to create a V neckline. So I already have a step-by-step tutorial on how to insert a round neckline, just a regular traditional neckline, but today we're talking about a V neckline. And the question usually that you ask is, number one, how do I adjust the pattern for this V shape? And number two, how do I insert the neckband on the angle so that way it would really sit nice and neat? So in today's video, we will explore exactly that step by step, so that way you can create something beautiful for yourself as well. So let's get started. So first, we will need to create that beautiful V neckline where your neckband is going to go in, and for that we need to take the pattern and adjust it. So go ahead and grab any pattern of the top that you would like to create that V neckline for. So I will be working with my knit bodice block that you and I created in one of my tutorials a couple of months ago. So if you have that, that would be really great to see how that works. If you have a t-shirt pattern, that will work as well. If you have any other knit garment pattern where you can adjust the neckline, that will work great as well. And just as a side note, there are quite a few free t-shirt patterns available on the market from generous indie patterns that would love for you to try their patterns. So I will leave the links for some of them in the info box below for you guys, so that way you can take a look and maybe grab a free pattern and try it on that. So go ahead and start with a new piece of paper, a ruler, and a pencil. Now I will be working with a Sharpie on my end, but on your end, go ahead and work with pencil, because pencil makes cleaner, thinner lines, therefore more accurate results. And then grab the front pattern piece of your top. For the first step, go ahead and fold in half your new piece of paper, and then we will copy your front pattern piece on the left and on the right. So that way, when we're done, it's going to make one full front pattern piece, and that will make it a little bit easier for us to understand where that V-neck is gonna go, how is it going to look like as the final result, especially if you've never worked with V-necks before. So once that is done, let's go ahead and drop the neckline, and I will go ahead and drop it by about 3¼ inches down the center front. Now if we do draw straight lines from that neckline all the way to the shoulder lines, we will see that that V-neck is going to be really narrow. So we will need to cut off a little bit from the shoulders as well. So let's go ahead and take about 1 inch on each side. So here's a quick little tip. If you're just not sure what type of shape of a V-neck, how deep, how wide, and other configurations of this V-neck neckline would suit you, then if you do have a V-neck t-shirt at home already, you can put that on and see what do you like about it or what you don't like about it. Of course, start with the practice fabric first if you've never done this before and you're just maybe not sure about your abilities. Starting with the practice fabric will always give you that flexibility of not being worried about ruining the fabric, but also practicing your best on it as well, without that pressure of making the garment from the first go. And of course, remember that you can definitely make it deeper, make it wider, whichever way you prefer. I am not a fan of really deep V-necks, so I do like this kind of like shallow V-neck where it's a V-neck but it doesn't go too deep. That's my personal preference, but you do what fits the best for you. Now after looking at it just for about a minute, I decided let's take away another 1/4 inch on each side of the shoulder seams, and then once that was done, I decided, you know what, let's drop it by another 1/4 inch down the center front as well. Once I have made the final version, I decided, you know what, that's going to be the shape, and I've outlined that in a Sharpie. Now you can leave it as is, or you can also curve it in a little bit, and you see the curved in version here in a green Sharpie. Now I do think that that gives you a little bit more of an organic shape for your V-neck and not as straight as just a triangle. And once you're happy, go ahead and cut it out. Now don't forget to label your template and which pattern piece it goes for. Now remember, since we did cut away about 1¼ inch from each shoulder seam at the front, you will need to do exactly the same for the back pattern piece as well, so that way the shoulder seams would match. And this is how my template will go on my front pattern piece of this top. Now once you're ready, let's go ahead and cut your fabric. Now here you need to remember that all of the patterns that I draft in my videos come without seam allowances and without hem allowances, so you will definitely need to add those as you cut your fabric. And this is how I deal with the pattern pieces where I only add like a little template like a neckline. I just fold them in so that way I don't have to cut the original pattern piece, I don't have to draft a full new pattern piece, I just do a little template. And again, don't forget to add seam allowances and hem as you cut, especially for the V-neck as well, as you can see on this example. Now I'm using 1/4 inch seam allowances. You can use more or less depending on what is your preference. Now the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sew the shoulder seams together. So take your back pattern piece, and remember we adjusted the width of the shoulders to match the front pattern piece, and lay the front pattern piece on top of your back pattern piece, right sides together, matching at the shoulders. Go ahead and pin them together, and after that we're gonna go and sew it. I'm using a serger in my case, but you can use a sewing machine without a problem. And if you're not sure how to use your sewing machine to sew with knits, then I will have a video for you in the info box below that dives deeper into that topic. For this next step, we're actually going to measure your neckline. So go ahead and grab your measuring tape, and you're going to start at the center front, measuring your garment all the way around. And that is going to give us a very approximate length of the neckband. And yes, your neckband is going to be shorter than the actual length of the neckline, so that way it would lay flat really nicely. However, for right now, my measurement is 25 inches. For you, it will be your measurement. Go ahead and memorize that or write it down and put it aside just for the moment, because right now you will grab a heat erasable pen or chalk, or maybe even some pins if that's easier for you, and we're going to mark center front on your garment with a straight perpendicular line. For this next step, you're going to grab your garment, fold it in half at the center front, and we're going to mark the center back as well. And after that, you're going to fold it in half one more time, and you're going to mark quarterways on your garment. So you have center back, quarterways, and center front, and that is going to help us to insert your neckband in the most neat way possible. Alright, now that these steps are done, it's time to create our neckband. And here you can use either ribbing, the one that I used right over here, or you can use the same fabric from your project. You can do either one, whichever you prefer. I do like the contrast between the gray and the floral print in this particular case, and ribbing is a little bit nicer to work with in terms of creating neckbands, not only V-neck but also the round ones, because it does stretch a little bit better than the regular fabric, and overall ribbing is what you will find on ready-to-wear garments as well. However, I often do the self fabric of the garment as well without a problem. So really, I think the bottom line is, what is the availability of the fabrics for you, whether the ones that you already have at home or maybe the ones that are sold in your area, and what do you personally like and what kind of look you like to see in your t-shirts. So as I mentioned, I will be working with some great ribbing to create a really nice contrast between the neckline and the garment. Now, since I know that the length of my actual neckline is 25 inches, that's how long I'm going to cut the strip of my ribbing. And after that, I will determine by how much do I need to shorten it for it to lay flat. Now, for the width of the neckband, I usually go for 2 inches, including seam allowances. So that way, when it's folded in half and already sewn into the neckline, it gives me a little bit less than an inch. And that's the width that I prefer. Now, you can choose whichever width you like. So now that your neckband is cut, go ahead and take your garment, and for this next step you will need to fold your neckband in half. So go ahead and grab it, place it wrong sides together like so, and then you will position it on top of your neckline, overlapping just by the amount of the seam allowance. Now go ahead and grab the other end of the neckband, and you will form a V-neck from that neckband, the one that will resemble the V-neck of the actual garments, and that way it will give us the most precise result. And we want to mark that position where one end of the neckband overlaps with another and also aligns with the center front line of the neckline that we marked a little bit earlier. So that way it will give us the angle at which we will need to cut away the ends of the neckband. Now the angle on one and on the other end of the neckbands are actually identical, so go ahead and copy one to the other, and then you can snip the ends. And while you're at it, we'll also need to shorten the neckband just by a tiny bit, maybe 1 to 2 inches, and that's probably the trickiest part to know by how much to shorten it. So usually what I do is I pin neckband ends together, and then I try to align it with the actual neckline and see if I need to cut away more or if this is going to be sufficient. And for this next step, we will need to sew the short ends together. So what I did over here, I actually marked the seam allowance with a heat erasable pen, so that way you would see it a little bit better. And then we're going to stitch it just with a straight stitch, nothing fancy, pivoting at the angle of the neckband and sewing all the way straight. And once that is done, our next step would be to mark the center back of the neckband as well, and quarterways on the neckband, just like we did on the neckline on the garment. Now once that is done, we will need to clip the seam allowance right over here, and you want to be really careful about it. You don't want to clip past the stitching, but you want to clip right up to it. Now that that is done, you will be able to open the seam allowance like this and then place it together, and now it lays nice and flat. Go ahead and pin it together with a pin, and now is our final chance to make sure that everything is just as we want it to be before we stitch it in. So go ahead and take the center front of the neckband and align it with the center front of the garment and go ahead and pin it together. And here that straight perpendicular line down the center front really helps to make sure everything is aligned just as we need it. And then go ahead and match the quarterways of the neckband with quarterways of the neckline, and with the center back of the neckband and the center back of the neckline on the garment as well. And this is our sort of last step to make sure that everything definitely fits as we want it to fit. And if it doesn't, go ahead and adjust it. But for me, this is perfect. So for this next step, I'm actually going to grab a hand sewing needle and a thread, and I'm going to baste it all together. Now you can use pin needles if you would like to instead of basting, but I truly think that basting these type of necklines is a crucial step to success. So that way you don't have to unpick anything later and you get everything right from the first time. So you're doing a little extra work with basting, but that definitely pays off. Now here are 2 moments that you really want to pay attention while you're basting. First one of them is aligning center front of the neckline and the neckband the best that you can. And the second moment is that you want to make sure that you uncurl all of the edges of the ribbing if you're using ribbing and it curls, and you match them really nicely with the neckline as well. So that way when you're sewing, you're just thinking about sewing. You're not thinking about aligning anything because you already did all the heavy lifting while basting your neckline in. Alright, now that it's done, it's time to put it in. And we're going to start at the center back. So go ahead, place it underneath your sewing machine or a serger, and I usually slow down once I get closer to the actual center front of the neckband. Here we will need to go a little slower, making sure that there's no gathers and no puckers right over here. And then I usually stop, adjust it a little bit, and then I also pivot the neckline as well, so that way I get that really nice angle there at the V-neck. And once that is done, you're just going to continue sewing all the way till you reach center back. Alright, now that the neckband has been attached, here are the 2 final steps before we can wear it. Number 1, we will need to remove this basting right over here, which is really easy to do. You just pull on one side and it comes right out. And the thing number 2 is we will need to press the neckband really nicely from the wrong side of the garment. Now here, as one of the really final steps, if you choose so, you can cover stitch on top of your neckband or use a twin needle if you would like to. However, I do not like to do that final step because I like my neckbands just like they are. Now, wasn't that easy? It was easy and pretty straightforward, right? Now, I always say, my dear sewing friends, that there are many ways how to do this or that in sewing. So these are the steps that I follow when I create my V-neck necklines. You can do whichever way it suits for you, as long as you are proud of the finished garment and as long as it brings you joy and the result that you want. So definitely find a way that works for you. You can totally do it. And if you want to see how to create a beautiful round neckline, then I have another very detailed video with all the tips and tricks right over here for you. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in that video and create something beautiful for yourself. Bye!